These are for noting. Who's taking this item, please? Sorry, Christy, I don't think we can hear you, unfortunately. Christy, do you want to try leaving the meeting and rejoining, and then we'll come back to the item? Is that okay?
We can hear you.
I can
Can
hear
everybody
it.
else hear Christy?
Yeah, I can hear it, Rob.
Is there any? I can't hear Christy. I think a few of us can't hear for some reason.
No, I can't hear.
You know what I mean?
Chair, I don't know whether, but item 4 forward work programme is just for noting. So I don't think there is any further updates on that other than noting it.
Okay. Well, Christy, if you could try leaving and rejoining, I'll come back to item 4 in case there's anything you want to add later on, but we'll note it for now. Okay, thanks, Christy. We'll move then to item 5, which is the regional transport plan, the case for change. And we've got our transport leads with us on this one. So who's leading on the item in terms of introduction, please?
I'll just introduce. Thank you, Chair. I'll bring in Lee White, who's come in to help us with the development and delivery of the regional transport plan. So Lee's an external consultant, has been brought in to help. So if I can hand over to Lee just to run through the preparation of the case for change, just to give an outline on there, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Stuart. Welcome, Lee.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, as Stuart says, I've been brought in to assist in the development of the regional transport plan. I think the important thing to note at the beginning is that the case for change is merely a step along the way. It's not the final product. It's not the policies that we would want to implement in the region, etc. So this is simply a stage along the way that we've got to meet and submit to the Welsh Government in a week or so's time. I think this follows from what was called the implementation plan, which was developed last year by Stuart and colleagues, which effectively is almost, and I call it a cake recipe. I think, you know, that is what we're intending to do to actually produce the regional transport plan by the spring of next year. So another step along the way, an important step today. Just in terms of the document itself, I think Councillor Price kindly defined the document as being in two parts. The first part is effectively a State of the Union comment. So where is the transport system today? And what are the sort of characteristics of that? In quite brief terms, it is a summary document after all. We don't need to get into the detail at this stage and recount a lot of the detailed evidence that we've been collecting in the last few months. The second part of the case for change is actually to understand why we need the transport system to evolve in the region. And we've set that out in a number of topics there. So we consider the economy, we consider the actual fabric of the transport network itself, we consider the environmental issues around the transport network, we consider, for example, the rurality issues that are quite pressing, of course, in parts of the region, and then we go on to express why we need to change. Now, obviously, there's a Welsh Government policy imperative behind us doing all this, but I think regionally there is a clear imperative for the transport network to evolve, obviously around population change, for example, around some of the economic activity that we know is coming forward, in terms of the various activities around the energy coast and so on. So there's a lot there that actually triggers the need for change, and we set that out hopefully quite succinctly there in the document that you've got in front of you. The final part of the case for change, and it is a quite important one, is that we set out once again in summary terms, are we going to engage with stakeholders and eventually conduct public consultation on the final regional transport plan, and also conduct the required impact assessment. So there is an integrated impact assessment required, and that's an evolving process through through the development of the RTP. So very much a stage along the way. I think back to you now, Stuart, if I may, Chair, to sort of tie up some of the administrative aspects of this as well. But that's the principles behind the case for change.
Thank you very much, Lee. Stuart?
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, so part of this obviously for submission by the end of the month to Welsh Government, and then we continue on the journey with the current sort of completion sort of timescale for the end of for spring next year, for spring 25. As I think a number of us discussed before, extremely challenging to hit that, and that's something that we're going to be looking at now. Is what can be delivered in the timescale. I think Lee's covered sort of that it's the state of the nation, what have we got at the moment, what the opportunities, why we need to develop it. I think the other thing from a regional perspective is that we've got the policy framework in terms of being Clwyd newydd from Welsh Government, but on top of that, it's making sure that it spells out the sort of opportunity for us to develop the economy. So that's a kind of fundamental part, really. So there's a lot of work required from now on, which we'll be moving on with and continuing discussions. We've obviously been provided with some funding from Welsh Government for the current year, 125,000 for the current year and £100,000 for next year. There will be need for some more funding. There'll be a number of work streams to kick off and a lot of consultation work. So that's something that we will be in discussion more. Transport for Wales have identified a kind of specific resource to help, and in addition to that, they've started to develop some really good modelling information, which will assist certainly with the evidence base and the testing different interventions and things that we for developing the programmes. One of the other challenges, to flag up, and it's it's certainly Welsh Government are fully aware of it, but the difficulty with setting what is a kind of a capital programme ahead. What type of funding levels are we talking about for the delivery of what comes out of the RTP? So that's an unknown at the moment. But as I say, getting this case for change submitted is a step on the journey, and I think. Unless, I don't know if Councillor Darren Price, as chair of the subcommittee, wants to comment at all, or if any of the other heads of service. So thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stuart. Darren, I'll fetch you in first as chair of the subcommittee, and then I'll come to Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And first of all, thanks to all the officers really for the work that they put in on this over the last couple of months. As we discussed in previous meetings, the timescale is really challenging in terms of what we're expected to meet from Welsh Government. So it's no mean feat really, the work that's going on in the background, particularly when we think of the other pressures that highways teams are under at the moment. So really grateful for that. We did meet last week or the week before last as a subcommittee, so cabinet members from the four councils and myself. And as part of that discussion on the paper that we had that we've got in front of us today, we also had Transport for Wales provide some additional detail to what Stuart suggested there. And there's a rich bank of data actually in terms of bus travel and also other data into the private car travel, which is really interesting. And that's broken down to county level. So all of that clearly will feed into the discussions that we have now in terms of what the solution looks like for us in South West Wales. I think the paper, as Lee mentioned, is a bit of a state of nations at the moment. The important part will be the next stage now in terms of actually, well, what does the solution look like? There was one amendment I put in to the paper that we suggested and we agreed as a subcommittee around the rail travel. There was table 3, I think it is, within the paper there. There was just figures provided for Swansea, but we felt it was important that the rail usage figures for the whole region was included, and I think it helps provide some context, and I think the important point that Stuart mentioned there around that rurality, I think that's something that we certainly need to get to grips with in moving forward. It can't just be around the the populated areas. We've got to think in terms of how we develop that sustainable, public transport system for rural areas as well. There are many counties, of course, myself included, that have seen cuts to community transport and rural transport over the past few months, and it leaves communities literally stranded. That's the reality. So we've got to think innovatively in terms of how we address that. And I'm pleased that the report acknowledges that in front of us today. So from my perspective, Rob, as chair of the subcommittee, very happy with what's in front of us. More than happy to move it formally and look forward to further discussions on public engagement now in terms of developing some solutions. Diolch.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. I fully agree. It's a regional transport planning has to be truly regional, doesn't it? So absolutely understand what you're saying there, and grateful for the work that you and the subcommittee have done with officers on this to get the paper to us. Steve, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Thanks for that, Dan. I actually watched back the whole subcommittee that you chaired, just to have an understanding of what other members thought going forward. And I thought it was an excellent meeting, some good suggestions. And I certainly support what you have said and what Rob has mentioned there. It's just for me, though, I just wanted to, the regional transport plan objectives. It's an understanding, I think both Lee and the speakers have mentioned it, as regards to funding. It's like a stick of rock. I think funding runs right through it. Where we're going to find the appropriate support to deliver. So I just wanted to check on the plan objectives. In there, walking and cycling is a high priority. So I'm wondering, within the plan, obviously, everything won't get delivered. It'll take time, and we'll be looking for funding from all sorts of pots, I should imagine. But given the Welsh Government, as we all know, is transport and the bus industry, what's happening in March, the money is not going to be available, perhaps, to deliver a lot of what we want. Are we looking at prioritising? Are we looking at the plan in peacemaking, whether we concentrate on delivering a particular part and moving on to other objectives? Or is it holistically going to be trying to deal with it all as a plan, which will probably be a lot more difficult? That's all I trying to understand, because it'd be good if we could sort of deliver on quite a lot of it. We've got ultra low emission vehicles there. Well, we know how difficult that's going to be with costs of everything and having the in place that what we need for these type of vehicles, etc. So I just want to get my head around where we are going with this plan, and when in a year's time or 2 years' time, what will be brought back as monitored, achieved, and recognised what we have done as a committee as all. I hope that makes sense. It don't always make sense, but I do try. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think I'll bring Stuart in to answer the question directly, but I think that comes in the next phase. But I think the plan has to cover all of the aspirations that we have, which is why all of the items are referenced in there. But Stuart, did you want to answer those points directly?
Yeah, I'll just comment on a couple of things, and then whether Lee wants to mention anything as well. But certainly the intention is it'll be, as we go through the work stages, is we'll have a very well developed programme of work, and it will be very much hitting those different interventions. The transport hierarchy is clear, is that it's to sustainable transport is the top of the tree. So walking, cycling, public transport, filtering down to sort of private car at the bottom of the sort of tree, really. But what we do is we build a case for what benefit those different interventions are going to bring, what programs will work, and what then schemes. It then goes down to the detail of schemes and what economic and social benefit, how they will then sort of achieve the well-tagged sort of objectives, the transport objectives, and meet the integrated sort of impact assessment. So it is about trying to work up very much a shopping list, so to speak. But some of those items on that shopping list will be expensive. We're obviously working along with Welsh Government on the rail interventions, and I think when you put the word rail on anything, then it certainly adds a number of digits onto there. So the interventions there will be a lot more than some of the other interventions, but it's measured against the impact. So hopefully there'll be different pots of funding available to then, currently we've got things like the active travel fund, there's the local transport funding. They're different work streams, but they need a policy framework and programs that we can bid against those. So hopefully that will give us the sort of register of things for that. But I think the other aspiration really is that the regional transport plan gives us a really kind of strong document, so that if we, in whatever guise, levelling up funding or whatever form of central government funding comes through, is that we've got a strong case to sort of say that if you provide funding against our regional transport plan, this is the benefit it will bring. So that's just some comments from me. I don't know if the chair wants to make any comments or anything.
Thank you, Stuart. Lee, is there anything you wanted to add to what Stuart said?
I think the only thing to add to that, Chair, is obviously we're in an evidence-led process, and as Councillor Price referenced earlier, there is a lot of evidence out there to actually drive the choices that we need to make. So I think we need to work through, as Stuart says, through those stages and actually come up with those detailed interventions. There will be packages that will be large and small, and obviously the way those packages are distributed around the region is actually one of the very important criteria that will need to be applied. As Stuart said, I think in the commentary earlier, it's not all about or Councillor Price, it's not about just solely about the urban area. It is about the rural areas where we've got very distinct transport challenges as well. So that needs to feature in the analysis that we're going to undertake.
Rob, can I just briefly come back? It will be
Yes,
brief.
certainly, Steve.
That's the reason I mentioned it, Lee. I mean, you probably hit the nail on the head. It's a regional programme, but demographically, each authority has its own challenges. And for Neath but Talbot, bus and rural is critical. And that's why I was talking about priority, because if you're looking at rail as the place to start, you're not going to get on to the buses then, putting it quite bluntly. And that is where we would want to concentrate, certainly in Neath but Talbot. So that's the reason I raised it. But thank you for your feedback. Very, very important. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I think, look, we've had a discussion regionally about our priorities for both bus and rail. My view of the funding, I know Stuart said that when you talk about rail, it's big numbers. I think we've got to get into the mindset of understanding, yes, they are big numbers, but they're small numbers compared to the spend that's going on across the border in England. If you look at Crossrail, if you look at HS2, the overspends are bigger than what we're being offered for potentially for the entire metro system. So, I want us to get a better and bigger share of the pie. And I think we should be very ambitious about doing that. And Steve, it's not an option between doing rail or bus or active travel or EV charging. I think wherever the opportunity arises, we go after the funding and we try and secure that into our region. But clearly, in terms of government priorities, there is a priority list. But to be honest with you, let's be ambitious and go after it all. I think that's what the plan allows us to do. I'll come to Aled next.
Yeah, Rob, can I just thank you for your last comment. I couldn't agree with you more. I think we do need additional resourcing. I think a task here is not to redistribute an ever-shrinking pot. I think we should be challenging around those issues. I'd like to congratulate colleagues as well for their workmanship here, and I would commend it. The only area I think that I possibly would want to reflect on is in the environment and greening of the transport system as included in the report, which I think is interesting. We tend still to think of moving people in and out of the national parks. Possibly we need to reflect, and I'm asking Lee here in particular, how we now shift an emphasis as well in terms of providing adequate resourcing for people within the park who need to reach public services and need to have communication with each other. Part of me thinks, do we really need more thousands of people in the park, or do we really need to be able to enable the people who live there to have innovative thinking around how they get from A to B. And I'm thinking here particularly about the most vulnerable. So I don't know if you want to speak to that briefly, Stuart or Lee, just to give me comfort.
Guys, which one wants to pick it up? Lee, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I think I totally agree, Councillor Edwards. It is an important matter. A few years ago, I actually conducted some work for the National Park Authority in the waterfalls area, the Upper Neath Valley, understanding how people moved around that part of the national park, and there was a distinct tension in that analysis of did the proposals link to the outside world, as it were, or did they actually deal with the very specific local issues that were occurring? And I think the view at that time was that was very firmly around dealing with the local issues, and I think in all its guises. So there was accessibility, there was obviously the parking issues that we're all familiar with as well. But I do take the point there that actually when we get into the evidence, we will be able to show what is occurring internally in the national park. Obviously, there will be evidence there about where the visitors are coming from, and I dread to say that it's about how those two sort of streams interact, because I know the tension's there and it always will be. But actually, it is about understanding what needs to be done at that very local level, as you say, for the community to have the access that it needs, but also how do you actually deal with some of the, shall we say, the adverse effects of the tourism. Clearly there's positives as well, but we do need to be clear how we deal with the adverse effect, particularly car-borne travel into the park as well. So I think it is something that's on the radar, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, Lee. Tegrin?
Yeah, I agree with the point Alan's just made, actually, and I was pleased to see that a whole section in there. We've recently commissioned some work with Pembrokeshire County Council on this issue or some of these issues, and I'm sure Darren Thomas is ably representing the views, but it was a bit of a request whether certainly at officer level we could have representation on groups taking this plan forward, because I think we might make a contribution which may be a slightly different from that point of view. I know we sort of sit on other groups further on, but the work tends to be done at the officer level to work things out at that level. So hopefully that's possible. At the sort of other end of the spectrum with your big schemes, I look at my window, I can't see much today, but I look at the window and I see lots of multinational big businesses on the Haven. And, particularly more so with the Celtic Freeport, I never think we do enough of using them from a lobbying point of view, from a transport point of view, particularly with rail and all of that. So I'm sure undoubtedly it's been on your stakeholder argument, but it's sort of, whether there's a way of bringing them in. So, when Valero calls, I'm sure people pick up that don't pick up for other organizations and all of that. So it's just how we utilize that political might or the influential might in order for the greater good, really.
No, I think it's a really good point, Tegrin. We've got, as you say, some significant industry across the region, specifically in terms of energy industry down in Pembrokeshire. They're big multinationals. They present a huge opportunity for us as we move to a different energy economy. And I think, we should use their lobbying and influence to ensure that our message is heard loud and clear by governments in Wales and London. So definitely pick up that point. Darren, did you want to come in on the point there? Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So Tegrin has obviously already mentioned the transport accessibility studies that we've been trying to assist the National Park in Pembrokeshire with, and that's beginning to identify some specific locational studies as well. So, for example, if you know Porthgain, there's specific issues there. I mean, in the parks area for us, the issues are around, that very high volume of visitors all trying to get to specific coastal locations and some Baselli locations as well. So it's quite interesting. But on a slightly wider scale, Chair, what we tend to find in our discussions then is that when we talk about local solutions with the communities, they point out to us, yes, that's fine, but people are thundering down the motorways to get to Pembrokeshire, what about solving that problem as well? So I agree we've got to get the local community issues correct, but there is still that time with the wider strategic issue obviously as well. So it's quite an interesting way forward, I think, and it will be reflected in the production of the plan as we move forward, definitely. In terms of the lobbying side of it, we are trying to make use, for example, of the Haven Waterway Enterprise Zone board members. So, for example, there's a lady there called Margaret Llewellyn, who is very influential in rail, and we've been certainly using her for some of the lobbying work, and will continue to do so. So, and the stakeholder list that we're starting to put together uses a number of very heavyweight people like that to sort of hopefully be involved in the plan production. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. Really good points again. Stuart, come to you.
Yeah, just Darren's covered most of it, but yeah, the stakeholder engagement, certainly picking up anything at local level and the sort of information. It's a huge stakeholder list at the moment. Intention is to engage as widely as possible, but the local level for those issues. I mean, it's been talked about the impact with tourism of, you know, when you look at the stats of people, the day trippers that are coming in, the number of people who are just travelling in for the day, it's massive. So although they bring economic benefit, there's a kind of a negative impact from that, and it's how we manage the sort of impact of those journeys in terms of the communities and the areas. But from Valero as well, the large companies like that, very much if they're involved with the development of really get their voice in the development of the plan, we'd then hope it would be a mechanism they can really get their back behind in terms of for that lobby voice as well. So I think the more engagement we've got at this stage to develop it, the stronger the voice is to then push for funding for the region and get that real impact. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Paul?
Thanks, Rob. Just a couple of points for me. I'm happy to support, but it's sort of reassurance, really. So first is around, you know, I recognise the policy framework and in particular the hierarchy that people have talked about, but just seeking reassurance that we as a group, you know, through Darren's subcommittee and particularly at officer level, we will appropriately challenge that framework where it doesn't work for the region. Sometimes I'm a bit too worried that we're too willing to rule take rather than sort of actually be willing to push back as and when appropriate and necessary. And then the second point really is just around, again, around that hierarchy. So I'm just seeking assurance that it's on a sort of case-by-case basis. There will be cases where the improvements that we need to deliver in transport infrastructure are necessarily focused around private vehicles because there is no alternative. I'm just making sure that it's on a case-by-case basis. So if that's the most needed intervention and say, for example, a private vehicle was the only real way of delivering that intervention, that would be appropriately prioritised against other interventions which may favour rail or bus or whatever, walking and cycling, but perhaps had a smaller economic benefit or a smaller overall transport benefit. So I'm just seeking that assurance really that you know we're willing to do what's required for the region rather than necessarily take as fixed the policy framework and the intervention hierarchy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I'm on the same page as you, so I'm assuming that is our flexibility within our plan. And again, I just make the point, I guess, we've got an incoming First Minister. We will have a new government. It may not be a different government, but we will certainly have a new government this year. So policy
hope not, Rob. That'd be a bit disappointing, wouldn't it?
We'll see. I can't be political in these meetings, but certainly we've got potential for new policy decisions in both Cardiff and London. So again, I think we've got to be flexible in terms of our approach here, in terms of how we deliver it. It can't be a one size fits all. It's got to be what works for the region, in my opinion. But Stuart, hopefully you can confirm that.
Yeah, the way that the funding will work, certainly from Welsh Government, it will be sort of tested against that hierarchy. So making sure that that the consideration's been given, but very much as has been spelt out when you're talking about some of the challenges of rurality and some of the situations that the sustainable transport may not be the sort of solution. So by spelling out what the challenge is, whether that's social, economic, whether it's transport poverty, whether it's access to health, by really kind of spelling out what those are, it gives us a kind of a way of bidding which isn't just on a linear to that hierarchy. We have to have, as you say, an ability to push for other interventions. But as far as we've got the evidence behind us to say what is the problem, that we've considered what the solutions are using that hierarchy, then it doesn't mean certainly that we dismiss other interventions that to the benefit of the private car. So that's very much the approach. But I know Darren and maybe Lee have comments.
Thank you, Stuart. Darren?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stuart. So, Councillor Miller, yeah, I mean, obviously you're right about the road-based intervention type of issue, and that's coming up as an issue on the Freeport side of things in particular, where we're already doing work and have done study work around the bypass for Pembroke. The issue I think we all need to think about very carefully there is the close coordination that we should have or will need with Welsh Government in particular, because there are some elements of the trunk road network which will need interventions as well. And I'm not sure whether that is quite right. So in terms of the pushing side of it, particularly from a political point of view, we've got to get that collaboration right, because at the moment it feels sometimes that Welsh Government keep falling back into that no roads type of discussion rather than a wider economic discussion that they should be having about supporting economic benefits where they need to as well. That's one point. The other thing is, yes, we are pushing, obviously, but I think there are certain elements we probably need your help on in terms of the cabinet members, sorry, the leaders. And I think that's specifically around rail. We probably need to bang the table more. Current issues we have around lack of reliability. We want to develop freight. We want to make sure investment is firmer into Southwest Wales. I think that, and you're already doing it, leaders, but I think that needs quite a strong push to get what we want in Southwest Wales. That would be my input. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Darren. Yeah, absolutely. And again, wherever there are opportunities for us to lobby or for us to make those noises and to make sure that we continue to highlight the opportunities here in the region, we will do so. I've given that commitment previously. I know the other leaders have as well. And again, it's something we're keen to do, because now that the Cardiff and South East Wales Metro is underway, well underway, we've got obviously the potential for North Wales or ourselves being the next to begin. We want to be the second out of the trap, and we've got Transport for Wales have given us already the statistical evidence to prove that the interventions in South West Wales are the ones that would deliver the biggest benefits in terms of moving people from private cars into public transport. So we've got the data to prove it. There is a nominal £1 billion in the Rail Investment Board, which we need to go after. And that's where I would hope that we can get a decision out of the new government as soon as it's in place. Darren?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Just to pick up on the point that Paul mentioned there, I think he's spot on. I think the whole idea of us developing a regional transport plan is that it's owned by us, and I absolutely 100% agree with you that we should be pushing back if there's any challenge to what we consider to be local priorities. At the end of the day, we understand our areas, and hopefully the data will be there to back up those positions. So I think that's really important. I mean, otherwise, if that's the case, then we might as well have outsourced the whole thing to Welsh Government, and they could have told us from the start what they want us to do in terms of transport. I think if we've been asked as a region to develop this, we need to be trusted to come up with the answers as well. So I absolutely agree with you that there should be pushback if there's a challenge. And I think it ties in with the point that Steve mentioned earlier on, really, in terms of how we go about funding this. Let's be realistic here. There's a massive void at the moment in terms of public finances, and we're seeing cuts to services as opposed to development. So I think what's important for us, I think, is to develop maybe short, medium, and long-term objectives, things that we can get on with and deliver quite quickly, which might be cheaper, and then the more medium and longer-term ones, then, which may require additional sums of capital funding. But clearly that's a discussion for us to have now, isn't it, over the next few months. And I think it's really important, picking up on the point that Tegrin made there, the stakeholder events we've got planned, and we've written, I think we've already written out, haven't we? Yes, I think to a number of stakeholders. Starting that process is a really important one, particularly in terms of industry, as Tegrin mentioned there, with the lobbying effort. So yeah, looking forward to the discussions over the next few months. Diolch.
Okay, thank you, Darren. I've not heard anybody speak against the plan. There are a number of additional comments which we'll no doubt pick up in the minutes, and those have been heard today. Darren has moved the report. I'm very happy to formally second it. Stuart and Lee, is there anything finally you want to say before I close the discussion and go to the vote?
I think everything's been covered, to be honest, Chair. We'll progress on. We'll get the copy with your approval. We'll get it probably sent in your name once it's been through this committee, so been approved, and we'll get it sent on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, last chance. Anybody else want to make any comment on the transport plan? If not, then could I ask colleagues to show if you're in favour of the report, please? Thank you very much. That is carried. I appreciate that, everybody. That'll put us in a good position to move on and to put us in a good position to hopefully receive funding when it becomes available. We'll move then to item 6, which is appointment of the Deputy Chief Executive. I'll call Craig in to introduce this report in a second, but it was remiss of me not to do so at the start of the meeting. You'll notice Will is not with us today. He's unfortunately got an appointment, but obviously we should record our best wishes to Will. I know he's back in work at the moment, but I know he's had a short period of ill health, so we do wish him a full speedy recovery, back to full health. But again, wish our best wishes to Will in terms of his recovery. But I'll go to Craig now, please.
Great, thank you, Chair. So this is just a short technical report from myself asking for authority to create the role of Deputy Chief Executive of the South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee. It's a way of ensuring additional resilience, obviously in the absence of a particular Chief Executive for any sort of fixed period of time. So the proposal, ultimately 2 members, is that we create this role, and the Chief Executives from the constituent authorities of Neath, Talbot, Swansea and Carmarthen be appointed then as these Deputy Chief Executives and capable of exercising the powers in the long-term absence of a Chief Executive. Obviously, we've agreed previously that the Chief Executive role will rotate, and so the Deputy Chief Executive roles will rotate then obviously to correspond with that going forward. It will be not remunerated, obviously, so there are no financial impacts ultimately for the CJC to be aware of, but merely there to ensure ongoing resilience and to ensure services can continue to progress the work of the CJC. So happy to take any questions that members may have, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. I think it's sensible that we have a nominated chief exec who can step up should the lead chief exec be unavailable. That seems to me a sensible arrangement. So this would formalise that. So very happy to move that as a proposal and move the suggestion there. Could I look for a seconder, please?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions on the proposal? No, if not, could I ask colleagues then to show if they're in favour of the proposal? Thank you. Thank you very much. That is again carried. So thank you, colleagues. We do not have any urgent items for today. So with that, I'll declare the meeting closed and look forward to seeing you at our next juncture. Thanks very much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks all.
Cheers, Rob.
Thank you.